So as Mimi mentioned, my name is Jason Wood. I'm the City of Cleveland's Chief of Sustainability. And in that capacity, can everybody see my screen okay? Awesome. So in that role, I report directly to Mayor Jackson, and I'm really responsible for overseeing the Office of Sustainability and really trying to kind of operationalize the city's efforts to mitigate the effect of climate change on the environmental, economic, and human health of Cleveland residents and beyond. As Mimi mentioned, I've been doing this for about a year and a half, but I spent about the previous eight and a half years in the city's Department of Public Utilities. So I bring kind of that perspective, that operational, that utility-based background to bear as we kind of think about this. When I was originally asked to do this talk and to come in, I was really excited about the opportunity to talk about linking climate action and equity in particular, as we really look at creating more vibrant and healthier neighborhoods and communities for all of our residents. This is something at the city level that we were absolutely committed to, and I think you're doing some pretty good work in this space. So what I think I'm going to do, if it's all right for the next 20 minutes or so, is kind of go through a little bit about our Sustainable Cleveland Climate Action Plan, talk a little bit about how we've embedded equity into that, and then shift to some of the specific examples of where we're putting that into practice, that equity focus into practice today. I would hope that a lot of you are familiar with Sustainable Cleveland. If not, I put the vision slide on the statement. I won't read it to you, but really it's an initiative that's run out of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. It was originally conceived as a 10-year initiative that was anchored to the 50th anniversary of the Cuyahoga River catching on fire for the last time, which was 2019. So we're a couple years past that, and really because of that success that we had in that initiative, we're continuing it and really hoping that it continues to serve as an opportunity to engage people to work together to develop thriving and resilient neighborhoods that build kind of that economic, social, and environmental well-being for all. So I mentioned this, the 10-year initiative. Probably the biggest thing that you may have interacted with us with there, and hopefully you've all had the opportunity to attend one of our summits. But really, I think we've been pretty successful through that process of setting the foundation for sustainability throughout our community. When we launched the Sustainable Cleveland Initiative over 12 years ago, we really built it on a focus about community engagement. And through that process, we've engaged over 15,000 people from across the community, nearly about 6,000 of them, so a pretty good chunk of them through our annual summits. And they've really kind of helped us work to develop this blueprint for how we can reduce our carbon footprint and create healthier, kind of thriving in those resilient neighborhoods. You're going to hear us talk about that a lot. That's really what we're trying to accomplish. So the community engagement is great. And I think probably our biggest success is the way we've been able to take that community engagement and translate it into some very tangible progress around renewable energy, local food, clean water, sustainable transportation, green space access, trees, and really a whole lot more. So how do we do all of this? It takes a really good, strong team to do this. We have 10 employees in the Office of Sustainability. Here's pictures of a variety of us engaged in various sustainable activities, but we really do work across multiple departments and multiple different policy areas. So we've tried to bring together a team that's got a lot of different backgrounds. So we're coming from a lot of different perspectives, both kind of subject matter and experience and life-wise. For example, we've got a dedicated energy management team, which has finance professionals and engineers, and they're really looking at how to reduce emissions and lower the cost of electricity for the city and for residents. We've got a lot of resources that are focusing on natural systems and really looking at connecting the community to the vibrant green spaces that we know are so critically important. Post-pandemic, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, how important those vibrant, active green spaces really are for people. And then we've got folks who are looking kind of at the more broad neighborhood level and trying to put it all together. They're bringing that planning and design and architecture and community engagement and communications background to the table. So that's a little bit about the office and who we are. But I think now we want to think a little bit about our climate action plan. If you want to understand what we do, this is the place to start. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what is a climate action plan? All right, it's really just a document that sets the course of action necessary to address the challenges associated with climate change, right? So this is just what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. So climate action plans should be context specific. So in other words, they need to be tailored to the unique challenges and opportunities that a community is facing. So Cleveland's plan is going to look a little different than other cities because our local context and the challenges we face here are a little bit different. In 2013, we put our first climate action plan together in Cleveland. And that plan was really organized around this overarching goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% over a 2010 baseline by 2050. Now, we set some interim goals, obviously, along the way, but we really wanted to push our plan towards this really aggressive long-term sustainable outcome. As you can see on this chart, we're making progress, right? So between 2010 and 2018, if you look at those green bars in the charts on the right, we've seen our emissions reduced by about 9%. I think probably more importantly, like a lot of places around the world, we've started to see what we call decoupling of emissions, right? So normally we think the more economic activity, the more emissions we're going to have. It's a fairly linear trend over time. And we're seeing that that process is breaking. So if you look at that blue line, that's really showing the relationship between GDP, how we're measuring economic activity in the region, which has increased about 20% during this period, relative to emissions, which have gone down about 9%. So we're seeing some strong decoupling, and that's a good sign. We're becoming more sustainable in how we do things, how we produce things, how we make things. And that's what we want to see here locally. We updated our climate action plan in 2018. We tend to operate on 5-year cycles, so the next update will be in 2023. And we carried that emissions focus forward, but we also made an intentional choice to bring equity to the forefront of our planning process. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute because it's fairly unique in the way that we've approached that. Like I said, we kept that big picture emissions goal, but we also in our 2018 climate action plan really wanted to account for a series of benefits beyond emissions reductions from climate action. So we wanted to focus on creating good local green jobs. We wanted to look at how can we help people reduce their utility costs and the maintenance costs for their homes. How do we really spend some time focused on risk management and resilience planning? How do we help create healthier and more comfortable homes and businesses for people to work in? Let's really spend some thoughtful time on improving air quality, public health, and quality of life at the neighborhood level. And really, how do we do a better job of educating our populations so that they have the tools necessary that they can use to take action at home? So this is a little bit hard to see, and I apologize for that. But this is essentially, and we'll put a link to this in the chat. I've got Brittany Montgomery from our office, who is a fantastic resource. She's going to be dropping some resources in the chat as we kind of go through here. But this is essentially the high-level overview of the climate action plan. If you look kind of across the top, you'll see that we've got 5 focus areas that our climate action plan is really built around. Energy efficiency and green building, clean energy, sustainable transportation, clean water and vibrant green space, and then more local food and less waste. Now, each of those is linked to our overall emissions reduction goal, but they're also linked to these other cross-cutting priorities that look at things like job creation and how do we engage businesses. And I think most importantly for what we're talking about today, how do we plug in and create a more equitable community through climate action? So to operationalize each of these focus areas, we've linked them to a series of objectives and goals. That's kind of what you see at the bottom of the table there. And we'll go through a couple of these in a whole lot more detail as we start to get into some of the specific projects that we want to highlight from an equity standpoint. So I mentioned that I've been doing this job for about 1.5 years, and I accepted in November of 2019 and started in January of 2020. And I like a plan. You'll learn this, but I love plans. I'm a planner. I like to kind of map things out. And I sat down and kind of set up the 10-ish things I wanted to get done in the next 2 years when I took the job. And I felt like I had a really good plan on how to get there. We were going to start running and rolling. And then March of 2020 happened. And things kind of shifted like it did for a lot of us. I think the arrival of COVID-19 fundamentally altered how we all live, work, and engage with one another. And then in addition to this challenge in 2020, we saw some unprecedented levels of civil unrest tied to some of the long established institutionalized inequities, disparities, and racism that we've seen manifest themselves across all aspects of our society. And we spent a lot of time in the city thinking about how do we do this and how do we address this. And Mayor Jackson in his State of the City last year really kind of did a good job of outlining how these disparities have impacted our community and issued a challenge for all of us, not just in the administration, but more broadly. But we took it very seriously internally in the administration. And he said, without substantive and sustainable institutional change, we'll never become a great city. We will never create communities where all people can thrive and share in quality of life and prosperity. And the question is, do we have the will and the courage to become a great city? It's like many people around the world, we had to stop and think about how do we respond to this change. And really we stepped back, and it caused us to really think about adjusting some of our timelines, reconsidering what we're focused on, and most importantly, think about how we can use what we do to support the change necessary to become a great city. And I firmly believe, and I think if you talk to anyone in my office or anybody who kind of works in the sustainability space, that the broader sustainability community and effort has a critical role in to create that change. I think the research has been pretty clear when we think about COVID, for example, about the strong linkage between higher levels of exposure to air pollution and increased COVID-19 mortality risk. So we can be that proximate about it. But we also see the high level of inequity play out in how we see the distribution of various environmental factors that link to other social determinants of health. So we've got to be thoughtful about this. And we stepped back as a sustainability office and really asked ourselves, what can we do about this now? And how can we use what we do to address some of these critically important challenges? So from our perspective, one of the first things that we could do was continue to implement our climate action plan. And we say that because we were very intentional during our 2018 planning process about embedding equity into our plan. So we know that the negative effects of climate change, like every other negative externality out there, are not felt equally. Like our low-income communities of color tend to be disproportionately impacted. So when we look at environmental risks and the social determinants of health and the economic impacts of climate change, those who are already facing burden are disproportionately impacted, right? Those costs are not felt equally. So our office's challenge, and this came directly from the mayor in 2018, and it's what we still have to figure out to do, is to figure out how we can use what we do to be better. And we baked that into the climate action plan. So this intentionality really started in the plan development process. We wanted to have a very open engagement process. So we had a 90-member climate action advisory committee that was instrumental in developing kind of this base of experience in the sustainable space, so really setting that foundation. And that is critically important because you've got to have the subject matter experts in the room. But these are individuals, organizations that are already active or have access to the space either directly or indirectly. And that's great, that's important, but it's not enough. So our keynote speaker at the 2020 Sustainability Summit was a gentleman named Dr. Julian Atchibald. And he's a professor at Tufts. And he literally wrote the book on just sustainability. And during his keynote, he said something I think that captures what we're trying to do so much more succinctly and eloquently than I ever could. So I borrow it all the time. So I'm giving him proper citation here as an academic, right? Green is green, and we all kind of understand what that means. But to be truly sustainable, green has to be equitable as well. So what this means from us from a practical standpoint is breaking out of talking to the people who are traditionally included in our planning process and getting a broader base of voices at the table. And that's what we tried to do with our climate action plan, our planning process. So we hosted about 12 climate action planning workshops. We wanted a diverse audience. We spread them across the city. You can see in the chart on the right, the racial makeup of the participants in there. And while it's not completely representative of the city population, it is certainly more close than we would normally be through these types of efforts and processes. We had over 300 people attend, and it was a really instructive process. So we wanted to follow this learn more, say more, do more approach, and engage people around the most important things that can improve their neighborhood quality of life. And this sounds a little bit odd. We deliberately did not ask them about climate change, right? Because that language can be a little bit intimidating. It can be kind of, it puts people on edge and think, well, I don't know much about that, so I can't give you a good answer. So instead, we really wanted residents to focus on the general needs and wants, those things that can really improve quality of life in their neighborhood. And then we worked to tailor climate-based solutions to help get there. So we wanted to listen to what the priorities were at the community level and then tailor what we do to kind of get to that point. To further embed this, we had all of our climate action advisory committee members participate in Racial Equity Institute training. If you ever get the chance to do this, if you've done it, I'm sure you can, you've kind of accepted and changed by it. It is really eye-opening. So if you ever get the chance to participate in this training, and we do them for folks all through the region, I think there's still some funding available to do some more trainings. It's truly eye-opening and really will shift perspective on what we're doing and how we can do better. So we took what we learned through that process and community meetings, and we developed a toolkit. And I would love to tell you that it's this big, complicated, I think it's not. It's a simple toolkit that really looks at 6 questions that help us evaluate how impactful we can be. And it's focusing on, have we engaged communities of color, and does the proposed objective really align with existing neighborhood priorities? So we ask ourselves, how do we track the outcome that we're looking for? And can we disaggregate our data so that we can illuminate disparity? We ask ourselves, who's going to benefit and who's going to pay the cost, right? There's benefits and costs to everything we do. We want to make sure that our vulnerable populations aren't being overly burdensome without being shared in the benefits and to reap some of those, the rewards of these activities. Can we link what we're trying to do with workforce development and economic opportunity so we can leverage that value and create wealth and community for those who have not been engaged? And lastly, are we meeting folks where they are from a language standpoint? Are we using language that's easily understood and accessible? And we'll drop a link to this. It's a great tool to just look at some of the things that you're doing organizationally, and even in your own life, just to kind of look at and think and get some perspective on. We'll drop a link to that in the chat so you can kind of take a look at that in more detail. So everything in our climate action plan was evaluated through this tool. And if it didn't meet those, if we couldn't check those boxes, we either went back to the drawing board or we deprioritized. We really were that intentional about trying to make sure that equity was ingrained in what we do. All right, so plans are great. Like I said, I love plans and plans are wonderful, but plans only matter if you take action, right? A good plan that just sits on the shelf is worthless. So we wanted to figure out how do we start to move towards implementation of this. And I think the first way, as we kind of look at some of these specific projects, is to start with our Cleveland's Clean and Equitable Energy Future report, which we put out earlier this year. So I mentioned at the outset that our climate action plan is centered on this GHG emissions reduction goal and that we've made some good progress, but we really do have a way to go, right? So our goal is 80%, we're at like 10 right now. So there's a lot of ground that we still have to make up. And when we think about what that path forward looks like, we have to focus on energy use because it's such a substantial portion, about half of our overall emissions here locally. So you see in that pie chart, that big green block on the side, that 49%, that's our energy use. To get there, we've focused a lot of our attention on two sub-goals. One is to have 25% of electricity used in Cleveland from renewable sources by 2030. And the second is to reach what we call 100% of electricity demand from clean renewable sources by 2050. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference. It's a little bit odd, but there is a difference between those two. So the first of those, we've made some progress. We have placed a lot of focus to date on what we call supply side, which is where we focus on generation or where our electricity is coming from, right? So are we getting it from coal plants? Are we getting it from natural gas? Is it coming from wind farms? Is it coming from solar fields? That's what we're looking at when we talk about this here. So this chart shows our clean energy supply in Cleveland. We have two electric utilities in the city of Cleveland, CEI and Cleveland Public Power. And what we really want to look at, so there's a lot happening here. The line to look at is that dark gray line. So that is the total amount of clean energy supplied into Cleveland, including our renewable energy credit purchases. And you can see that we're about 13%. So we're halfway to our goal in our timeline. So we're feeling pretty good about that. And I think that's reflective of the amount of attention we've put onto this over time. But we need to make sure we're giving as much attention to the demand side, right? So these are things that people can do in their homes, their businesses. It counts for supply side, but this is also energy efficiency, putting solar panels on your home, unplugging fixtures when they're not in use, turning off the lights. So it's all of these things that you can do and people can do at their own pace to do. So we put together a collaborative effort, we put a core team together, got some external experts from GreenLink Analytics, who are one of the leaders nationally on carbon footprint accounting, to help us understand kind of what we're looking at and to develop this transition plan. So how did we put equity into this, right? Like we do with all of our work, we wanted to focus on the environmental and economic benefits that the transition could support. But we also wanted to make sure that we were using this as an opportunity to understand energy equity and account for it in our planning, in our implementation process moving forward. So whether we look at access to jobs or energy burden or any of the other measures that we know matter, we see that locally we've got a lot of work to do on energy burden. So this is energy burden here on the map. The coloring's a little bit funny here. We'll have to clean that up for you. But this is in the report, which we'll drop a link to in the chat. Nationally, you would expect people to spend about 3.6% of their household expenses on electric and gas. That's the national average. In Cleveland, our average is 6.5%. And that's problematic. That's bad. That means 100,000 of our households right now live in what we term high energy burden. So they're paying more than 6% of their household expenses every month to electric and gas. 40,000 of our households are in what we call severe burden. They're paying more than 10%. So we can't have this discussion and think about implementation locally without having an energy equity and an energy burden conversation. So I said we'll drop the link to the report in the chat. It's a very long, technical, statistical document. If you like that stuff, you're going to love it. If you don't, skip to the end because that's where the takeaways are. But I do want to, and I think there are three broad takeaways, right? And the first of those is that our ability to achieve what we're trying to do locally. So we've got these aggressive local goals is really constrained by state policy. So in other words, for us to get where we want to go without more support or a different approach at the state level is going to be difficult without a substantial investment in renewable energy credits, which from our perspective is not the optimal strategy. Now, having said that, even within those constraints, working to transition to clean energy can have a significant and positive impact on the key priorities that we've put out there in our planning process, which includes promoting energy equity, creating jobs and wealth for residents in our community, and improving human and neighborhood health just by having cleaner air and cleaner access to energy. And then third, we've already done a lot. We've got a good foundation to build from. We've got a lot of things that are already in the work. We've got more commitments that we've made as a city. And now we have this fairly robust policy toolkit that we developed through this report process to help us move forward and hit where we need to be by our 2050 time. So I'll switch gears again. And another project we've got where we've tried to bake in some equity is our Circular Cleveland initiative. I know there's a lot of interest and attention on waste management. And this is really where we think that we can do something different. I think if there's one thing that we can all say about waste is we are not going to recycle our way out of our waste problems. So we have to look at other kind of more circular solutions that put a much greater emphasis on the reduce and the reuse part of the 3 R's. So we went out last April and got some funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to develop this Circular Cleveland initiative. And from our perspective as a city, the timing couldn't have been better. We really were struggling with some of the realities of our own recycling program and changes in the waste market, where we had to step back and kind of reset, rebuild, and ultimately restart a big portion of our waste management operation, both on the recycling and the bulk and the regular trash collection side of things. So we were awarded the first pot of money this foundation had ever opened up for sustainability. We were awarded in conjunction with some great partners who you can see on the screen here, about $475,000 to launch a 30-month project that will help us transition or begin the transition to a circular economy in Cleveland. It includes funding for a roadmap, which is great. We love our plans and we have to have that. But what we really like about this funding is it includes funding for implementation. So it's not just developing a plan, it's developing a plan that helps setting us down a path to get where we want to go. As we've been working through the communication process with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, one of the things we learned, and one of the reasons we were awarded this grant, like I said, we were one of 6 cities that were awarded it, is because we put equity at the center of our process. Our intentional focus on equity and how we can align the environmental and economic benefits to our vulnerable populations in Cleveland was one of the determining factors in why we received this grant. They're really interested to see how we're going to do this because no one has tried to censor this like we have in our approach. So if you're not familiar with the circular economy, sometimes it's easier to think about what it isn't before we think about what it is. So right now we have a lot of linear economic activity where we take things out of the ground, make them into things, and then we throw them away. That's a linear process. And we want to move to something that's more circular, where we make things, we use them, we reuse them, we find ways to remake them. And then as a last resort, we recycle. And doing this, we think will really allow us to become more environmentally sustainable. It allows us to shape those healthier communities, neighborhoods that we want to see. And perhaps most importantly, if we do it right, create economic opportunity and wealth for residents. The good news is we're not starting from scratch. There's quite a bit of good activity that's already happening in the region. While the term circular economy is fairly new, its underlying principles are not. We've got a lot of residents who are participating in the circular economy, oftentimes out of necessity or out of kind of historical, cultural patterns. We see things like shopping local, composting, tool sharing, fixing lawnmowers, donating things as opposed to throwing them away. There are so many ways that this is already happening. We also have a lot of businesses and nonprofits driving circular activity. Habitat's Restore is a great example of reuse and redistribution. But we've got a ton of good work underway in a whole host of other sectors that we can point to that's already happening now. And we'll drop a link. I think we've got a blog post that we can share a link to in there if you kind of want to learn some more about some of the great activity that's already happening in and around Cleveland. So our grant, what we're going to do, we've got our roadmap. I mentioned we got to have a plan. So we're going to scan our local market. We'll do all the data analysis. We'll do the detailed materials flow work that has to happen in there. And then we're going to engage with other cities. A lot of those will be international communities because that's where a lot of this cutting edge stuff is happening to see what we can adapt to the Cleveland context. And we've already started that. And this is where we've started to build equity into this, right? So we're working through the community and stakeholder engagement process already. We had 100 people show up to participate in the first phase of that community engagement. And I think what's equally as important to the number is who those participants were. So we had community members and neighborhood activists, and they were interacting with nonprofit leaders from the community. They were representatives from corporate community, Fortune 500 at the table. And everybody was working together in this engagement process to make this as inclusive as we possibly can and keep that focus where it needs to be from our perspective on our residents and how to improve quality of life. I mentioned it earlier, but I can't say it enough. We love this grant because of the implementation funding. So we're going to see the launch of a composting program at the West Side Market. We're going to see the increased engagement through our Circular Cleveland Ambassadors program. And then we also have some specific money dedicated to small neighborhood projects. So those folks who are doing the work now, we want to provide them with some seed money to help them scale up, to kind of help bring those ideas to scale so that this thing you may be doing out of necessity or this thing you just may be doing because you're passionate and you enjoy doing it, how do we help kind of get you on a path to kind of turn that into a business opportunity or turn that into an employment opportunity and create some wealth creation and business ownership opportunities through that. And then we're also going to administer some loans through our Department of Economic Development, about $100,000 of small business loans. So we're underway. We've awarded the first, I mentioned those community-focused grants. Here's a couple of examples on the screen. We've been able to really award some of these already. We got the first round of funding out in July. We awarded over $40,000 to 14 projects, and they're doing some wonderful, wonderful stuff. I really can't say how impressed we were with the quality of applications that we received. The second round will be done sometime in early 2022, kind of timed to the end of the roadmap project. And we've also launched our community ambassadors program. And this is really important because this is really how we stay connected at the community level. These are individuals that we're going to contract with or can receive a small stipend and will really serve as those neighborhood liaisons to the initiative. We tried to spread them as best we could across the city. We've got 12 of the neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland covered. And we're excited about where this is going to go. Okay, so trees. I want to talk about trees. I'm assuming because you're on this call, I probably don't need to say this, but trees matter. Trees are really, really important. They are a vital, critical component of our urban fabric, and restoring our tree canopy in Cleveland is a super high priority for us. In our 2018 Climate Action Plan, we set a goal of restoring our tree canopy to 30% in Cleveland by 2040. And we do that because we know that trees matter, right? So I think Mimi mentioned some of my background. I have a degree in economics. I have another one that's really focused on statistics. I love numbers. I love to talk about numbers. So here are just a few of some of the tangible financial benefits of the tree canopy in Cleveland as it exists today, right? So we see an annual environmental benefit in excess of $11 million. The lifetime carbon storage benefit of our canopy is $26 million. And we see about $3.7 million of avoided negative health incidents from our canopy as it exists today. And we know that there are so many more benefits beyond what's easily quantifiable for trees that we just kind of have to figure out, how do we do this better? So from the city's perspective, this really starts with understanding where our trees are. So the ones that the city owns and we're responsible for maintaining, where are those? This is primarily in parks and along side streets in the tree lawn, right? So that's what we have. We don't do a lot of planting. We're not illegally allowed to plant on private property. So this is a map. This is our street tree inventory. And based on what you can see that trees aren't spread equally across our city. We have moved all of this into our GIS system, and this I can talk for hours about the technical operation side of this. But what it's really going to do is that's our asset management system, and we want to use this to improve maintenance. So how do we do a better job of maintenance when we do projects? How do we protect the trees that are in the right of way a little bit better? So this is a critical step for us, right? And this really gives us a framework for us to begin to think about, how do we start to plant with a purpose? And this is what our urban forestry operation in the city of Cleveland is responsible for. And this is the approach that they're taking. So we've got to move beyond just thinking about planting trees, but really focusing more on establishing trees. So in other words, putting a tree in the ground really isn't that hard, but getting it to stay alive, once you put it there, it's. So we focus on the city on three things in this approach. And one is putting the right tree in the right place. So making sure that what we plant can survive in kind of the root area it has, that type of soil and that type of sun exposure, those conditions. We want to plant trees during the right season. There are certain trees that are more likely to establish if they're planted in the fall or the spring. And then lastly, having a consistent maintenance plan for our trees, especially in their early years of life. So how do we keep them alive? So we're following that, and we have supplemented what we're able to do from a planning standpoint by adding $1 million in the budget. So in 2019, Mayor Jackson made a commitment that we would put an additional $1 million a year for the next 10 years into tree planting. And you can see the effect of that, right? In 2020, the first year we had those funds available, we see a pretty steep increase, about a 300% increase over the previous 5-year average in our street tree plan. In 2021, we're moving towards having about 2,700 trees planted this year. And then next year, 2022, we'll get to about 3,000 trees planted, which will kind of be that steady state operation. And this looks really, really impressive, and it is. It's something we're tremendously proud of. But the reality check on this is that for the city to get back to 30% canopy coverage by 2040, we need to plant about 28,000 trees a year. So we're pretty, like the city's able to do about 10% of that, the rest of it. And this is largely because of limitations and available planting locations and tree stock and all of those things. What this means is we need private partners to step up and help us get more trees planted on private property. And this is where the Cleveland Tree Coalition comes in. So the Tree Coalition is a collection of about 40 different organizations who are working to coordinate planning and maintenance activities on private property so that we can reverse the trend and move towards our broader tree canopy goal. You can kind of see who's in the logos on the left. Those are the folks who make up the executive committee. I serve on that on the city's behalf. And then all of the community groups and businesses that have made the commitment to be Tree Coalition members. So you guys get to see something that no one else has seen, right? So you are the first people to see this. So if it's terrible, please let me know. If it doesn't make any sense, please let me know, because we haven't talked about this too much. So one of the things that the Tree Coalition does is they help us update the tree plan. And we'll put a link to the tree plan. It's a really interesting document that kind of has a lot of this background information in there. And that provides a foundation for how we've been planting and targeting our plantings for the past few years. So the map here comes basically out of the tree plan, and it really shows where canopy is low at the neighborhood level. And this is what we had been using as a city to guide where to plant trees. So we would go to the neighborhoods that had lower canopy levels. That's where we would put them. And really, it's more of an equality approach than an equity approach, right? Because we know that the marginal value of that tree is different based on where we plant. So we know trees can solve a whole lot of different problems for us. And if we can put that tree where it can do more good, it's a better investment for us from the city standpoint. So under the current approach, we were not accounting for anything other than canopy coverage. So low canopy coverage, trees going there. We weren't accounting for income, race, urban heat island, health, exposure to environmental risks. So none of that was factored in. So earlier this week, we rolled out and announced that we're going to be shifting to what I think is a true equity-driven prioritization model. So we've gone from that kind of disparate neighborhood thing to something that is a little bit more precise, and that it moves from the neighborhood level or the ward level. We translate neighborhoods into wards, but targeting to blocks. So we're going to be much more precise and strategic in where that tree goes based on a variety of factors. And we've moved from a canopy-driven approach to one that counts for canopy, because that's important, but also accounts for a variety of social, economic, health, and environmental factors. So we kind of are building on the tree equity score that was created by the American Forest, which is one of the big kind of organizations really understanding trees and tree canopy in urban environments. And their model includes canopy coverage, demographics, and land temperatures, and other various health measures. Due to some of the unique challenges that we feel that Cleveland faces, we kind of cracked that index open, added our own variables to assess the local context and rebuild it. And we included things like energy burden, because trees are a viable policy alternative to reduce energy burden in communities by creating cooler neighborhoods and more comfortable neighborhoods. They have very large wastewater, stormwater management benefits that we all experience in Northeast Ohio, and then can do a tremendous amount of good for air quality. So we built all of that into this new approach. And starting in the spring 2022 planting season, we've already ordered the trees for 2021, or else we do it now. But in spring 2022, we're going to adopt this in the city, and we really hope other organizations will adopt this as well, so we can become a bit more strategic in how we do this. And the last one, I promise, last one I'll talk about is access to green space, because we've all seen how important this has been in the COVID-19 pandemic. And the city has a goal of having everyone within a 10-minute walk of a safe programmed park. Currently, we're at about 83%. This is according to the Trust for Public Lands Park Score. And this puts us well above the national average. The national average is about 55%. So we are far above that in Cleveland. This is probably one of the reasons in the 2 years I've been here, not because of me, it's just happenstance, but that's my frame of reference. We've gone from being 35th in the nation on park score to 24th. So we are moving up. We are already very high, and we are continuing to move up in terms of park access. The map on the slide comes from the TPL's Park Score website. We may drop a link in there. It's a little hard to find, but it has this fun interactive feature where you can draw new parks on the map to try to increase the percentage of residents within a 10-minute walk. Like I said, we'll put a link in the chat to it, but I will warn you, it is incredibly addictive. I may have not spent about 45 minutes trying to draw boxes on the map while I was making this presentation to try to get to 100% with as few parks as possible. But we're not satisfied with that. We want to get to that 100%, but we also want to make sure we're, again, coming back to community engagement, aligning that with neighborhood priorities. So we've got another grant in collaboration with the Trust for Public Land and the Urban Land Institute, where we're really developing some engagement strategies to move where we engage around parks in the process. So instead of taking fully designed parks to residents and say, tell us what you think, asking them before we do the design, which is, what do you need? How can this park better serve your community? And then designing around those community priorities. That should be wrapped up here in the next couple of months. And we're anxious to kind of see what we learn from that and how we can improve what we do. Shameless plug to wrap it up. Our sustainability summit is October 20th and 21st. It is virtual. So we'll be doing it on a platform called Hop In. We had a lot of success with this last year. If you want to learn about any more of these topics, or just to understand a little bit more about what we're doing in Cleveland and all the great work that's happening, I would really encourage you to register. It's free. You can kind of come in and out for however you want to sit through, and it's a really good event. We should have about 400 or 500, maybe 600 people attend. That's kind of what we usually get on an average basis annually. And it's just a great way to see about some of the good work and some of the things that are coming down the road in Cleveland from a sustainability standpoint. So with that, I would love to talk and answer some questions. Let me stop sharing here, and we can.
Thank you. That was just so informative and amazing. I mean, such great work. Thank you so much. I think everyone here is very excited about it. We have a ton of questions, and I just one that jumped out to me because it happened to be my question is, how much are you, if at all, coordinating with the other communities in the county and the county government itself on some or all of these initiatives?
Excellent. I was the first one to do it, to start talking while muted. Somebody has to do it on every Zoom. We work pretty closely with the county in particular. So Mike Foley, my counterpart, and I, I'd say, talk at least every week about a whole host of things. We've also recently started to organize a series of meetings of all of the sustainability professionals, both government and non-government. And we meet on a monthly basis. I think it was supposed to be Friday. We moved it back due to some conflicts for folks. But every month we're kind of coming together and talking about critical issues and trying to figure out ways that we work together. And it's really important to leverage those connections, because emissions don't stop at the regional border, right? Like waste doesn't stop at the regional border. Like for Cleveland to be successful, what we're trying to do, we have to collaborate and we have to work with all of our partners. So it happens quite a bit. And we're seeing a lot of interest. We rolled out our Circular Cleveland initiative. I had at least 4 or 5. It was on a meeting with 4 or 5 suburban communities, and they had their representatives, and they're like, "Oh, can we tap into this? And how do we partner?" So we've got to find ways to bridge that gap on that project and kind of make those connections. City can't do it alone. No government can do it alone, and that's why collaboration is important with nonprofit sector and corporate sector. Like, the challenges we face are just too big for any one institutional actor to take this on themselves.
Sure.
So that's a great question. Collaboration is critically important.
We have a lot of questions, but one in particular that we all noticed living in the suburbs is how the utilities seem to be cutting out big chunks of our trees and sometimes even taking down the trees. So we just wondered, do you guys work with the utilities in terms of making, trying to keep them from decimating the trees as much as they seem to be doing?
Yeah, that is one of, if not the biggest risk to Canopy, is particularly when you're talking about right-of-way trees, so trees and tree lawns and right up against the street. We've had some success, and and how we approach this, we've got 3 utilities that really are managing that work. So we have Cleveland Public Power, which is a municipally owned electric utility. So we have a lot of control there. We have CEI, like most of Northeast Ohio, and they have their own approach. And we've been able to work with them. They used to trim to an 8-year trim. So that's kind of taking more out of that tree. And we've been able to work with them to get them down to something a little more close to a 4-year trim, which is a little bit more in line with kind of the minimum requirements that they can do and still maintain safe clearance. We've seen a lot of effect on our Canopy from Dominion doing pipeline replacement project. And there's no way to get around that, right? I mean, these pipes have been, we're an older industrialized built out city, and we've, the pipes, the utility side of things, they have to replace the pipes in order to maintain a functional and safe system. We've had a lot of success working with them in our urban forestry. Jennifer Kipp, who's our manager in our urban forestry, has done a really great job of working with them to get kind of some of those permits done in advance so we can work with them on programming and doing everything we can to prevent that from happening. But anytime you're opening up the ground and a curb in that tree lawn, you're putting trees at risk, because that's where the root path grows. So it's about managing those. We've had some success. Are there things that could be better? Absolutely. But we're better than we were a few years ago. And I think the pathway is to get a little bit better. But the trick is to have the folks who are working with it on a day-to-day basis interacting with the utilities and just having a very candid conversation. And we've been able to do that.
And I'm guessing this is probably happening, but you might not have had time to present about it. But in terms of making the transportation in the city more sustainable and more friendly to people without cars, what's going on? Is your office involved in that, or is that a different department?
We work with our city planning department. So our city planning department takes a lot of the lead on that, and we kind of work in collaboration with them. There was one of those things that, as I was going through this, I kind of outlined what I initially wanted to talk about, and I kind of went through and did a little practice with it. It was like 55 minutes long. I'm like, oh, something's got to go. So unfortunately, sustainable transportation was a piece that came out of there. So RTA has really done some good work around their next gen strategy and trying to realign and kind of segment these things. What we're doing as a city is thinking about how do we fill that last mile transportation gap, whether that's through things like shared mobility, whether it's ride share. We've tried some car share projects in Cleveland that have had mixed results. The scooter program is one thing, but that doesn't cover the entirety of the city. So how do we start to make connections from both a walkability standpoint, from bike pathways, and connecting to all of these bike corridors that we have running through the city? So we're working in conjunction with our city planning department really to help drive that. They kind of own that. I was in a meeting right before this on our Vision Zero task. We have a Vision Zero task force in the city of Cleveland, which is really about bike and pedestrian safety and making streets safer for bike riders and people walking through neighborhoods. So we're working on a lot of things, but that was one of the ones, unfortunately, that kind of hit the cutting room floor as I kind of thought about how to cut this down to a manageable amount of stuff.
Sure. Well, we really want to thank you so much. We have a ton more questions, especially about trees, but unfortunately we have to go because we have like a thing scheduled every single hour, and people need to just get up and do things in between their activities. But this has been outstanding, and we learned so much. I think everyone, I certainly can speak for myself that it's very heartening that you're putting equity at the center of it and really reaching out to people. And it's exciting to see Cleveland getting better and hear about all the things that are going on. So thank you very much.
And if you ever need me to come back and answer, feel free to do that. I think my contact information is on one of the slides there. If not, Brittany, we can drop it in the chat. Anybody who's got questions, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to talk. COVID kind of destroyed that human interaction for a while, so I miss talking to people. So feel free to call me, send me an email. I'm more than happy to answer just about anything.
Well, we have a pretty large climate action committee, so maybe one of the next times we meet, perhaps we can try to figure out a way to talk with you a little more during that time.
Happy to do so.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Brittany. And we know how busy you are, so we really appreciate your time. And this has been great. And the graphics were beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Take care. We've all been copying down every link that you shared.
Did someone save the chat? I'm just curious because I know there were so many links that were posted there. I was trying to do that. I can't figure out how to do that in my,
Steve, it'll save it. I think it automatically saves.
okay,
That's happened last night, so
okay.
I'll do it right now, just to make sure. And I can
And
even
and
share.
also, everything is a link from that website of sustainablecleveland.org. So I think that we could probably find all those links right from that website.
If you have
And
trouble saving it. if
And
you
I'll
have
make a
trouble saving it,
picture
I think it's a
also.
great job.
Nancy Hecht and I have attended that Sustainable Cleveland Summit in the past. It is great. It is really so fascinating, even if you just go to one day of it.